My dear friends, before we start, I asked you all to press a like and leave your comment. This will help a lot to promote this video and to release news stories as soon as possible. It's not hard for you, but it's a pleasure for me. Thank you. It was the summer of '77, a year that felt as if it could be ordinary. But of course, ordinary is the very thing that rarely comes to Delwick. The town sat on the edge of some invisible divide, like it knew it was hiding secrets under its quiet streets and behind its faded facades. And at the center of one such secret was an old house, a two-story wooden relic from another time, left to rot behind a sprawl of wild trees and iron fences. Most people didn't give it a second glance, but we weren't most people. I'm Marcus, a skeptic by most measures, but if there's one thing I knew about myself, it was that I'd follow my friends into just about anything. That summer, our little band of high school friends had gathered back home for one last adventure, or at least that's what we called it. Tina, our ringleader with a smirk always plastered across her face, was our fire starter. She was the one who didn't know the meaning of the word afraid, or at least that's what she claimed. And then there was Elle, ever the voice of reason until someone dared her otherwise. Luke, who always swore he didn't believe in ghost stories but had a curiosity he couldn't quite hide. And Trey, the daring one who always managed to look unimpressed, no matter the risk. It was one muggy night, just after a long, lazy day and a street dance that left us all in high spirits, when we ended up near the old house. Bet no one here has the guts to spend a night in there, Trey muttered, grinning as he looked at Tina. She rolled her eyes. Please, I've slept in worse places. Besides, what's there to be afraid of? Old floorboards? A few spiders? Luke chimed in, glancing around as if anyone else could hear us. Yeah, but they say something's and there's something that can mess with your mind, play tricks, you know? I laughed. Oh, come on. You don't believe those stories, do you? But Tina looked right at me, her eyes gleaming with challenge. I'll go, she said, shrugging. I'll go and stay the whole night, and I'll prove to you all that there's nothing in there but dust and old memories. When Tina said she'd stay the night alone, none of us really expected her to follow through. But the next evening, there we were, standing in front of the house again, the last of the summer light stretching long shadows over the cracked steps and boarded windows. Tina was ready, backpack slung over her shoulder, flashlight in hand, looking far too enthusiastic for the situation. You don't actually have to do this, you know, Elle murmured, shooting a worried look at me and the others. But Tina just laughed. Are you kidding? I'm not backing down. Besides, I want to see this shade of Delwick for myself. Maybe it's just a mouse with good timing, she said with a grin. Luke and Trey laughed, but I couldn't shake a strange feeling in the pit of my stomach. I'd always been the skeptical one, the first to say ghost stories were just that, stories. But that house had a presence, something unexplainable that hung around it like a shroud. The air seemed heavier the closer we got, and every noise, every small creak of the wood, felt amplified in the silence. All right, but if you need us, we'll be right out here, I said, trying to keep my tone light. Scream, and we'll come running. She rolled her eyes, looking every bit like the Tina I knew. Fearless, stubborn, and dead set on proving her point. I'll be fine, Marcus. You worry too much. Anyway, I don't plan on screaming. Maybe I'll hear you screaming from out here, if anything. With that, she flashed a grin, pushed open the cellar door, and slipped inside. We waited until we heard the door creak shut, the echo sounding like a final, reluctant sigh, and then she was gone. The rest of us settled in nearby, having dragged an old bench over from a nearby park. It was the kind of night where the darkness felt thick, pressing, and it seemed to draw out every sound around us. The rustling of leaves, the distant bark of a dog, and, strangely, the creaking of that old house, as if it was adjusting to Tina's presence inside. Elle broke the silence first. Do you think she'll actually last the whole night? Are you kidding? Trey chuckled. This is Tina we're talking about. She'll probably redecorate the place by morning. Maybe even find something interesting. I bet there are old treasures in there. Or rats, Luke muttered, staring at the ground. He tried to sound amused, but his voice wavered. I couldn't help but feel a twist of worry. The thought of Tina alone in that decaying house didn't sit well with me. But it was Tina after all. If anyone could spend a night there and come out unscathed, it was her. We passed the hours sharing stories, recalling old pranks from high school, and eventually pulling out a small bottle of wine that Trey had brought along. The night deepened, the air cooling. Conversations drifted, tapering off into silence. And that's when it happened. The unmistakable sound of something heavy falling inside the house. We all froze. The noise echoed out from the cellar, a muffled crash that seemed too deliberate, too purposeful. Luke jumped up, looking around. What was that? Relax, Trey whispered, though I could see he was just as tense. Probably just Tina moving something around, or a door falling over. I wasn't so sure. My pulse quickened as I stared at the house, waiting for any other sign. But there was nothing. No lights, no movement, no sound from inside. By 3 a.m, the house had gone utterly silent. It was as if it were holding its breath, waiting. And by then, the novelty of waiting had worn off. Even the last sips of wine didn't take away the edge that had crept into all of us. We should go check on her, Elle whispered, her voice barely audible. But Luke shook his head. No way. She'll never let us live it down if we ruin her dare. As if in response, another noise split the silence. A quick, frantic scuffling, like footsteps across the wooden floor, followed by a scraping sound. This time, Elle's hand found mine, her grip tight. Okay, this isn't funny anymore, she said, glancing nervously at the house. I took a deep breath, more for my own nerves than anything else. Tina, if you're messing with us, it's working. I called out, my voice swallowed by the night. But there was no answer, only the same impenetrable silence. Just as I was about to suggest we go inside, we heard a noise from the cellar door. It creaked open, slow and deliberate, and we all turned, watching as Tina's flashlight beam cut through the dark, illuminating the dusty path ahead of her. She stepped outside, clutching something in her hand, her face a mix of triumph and bewilderment. Did you guys hear that? She asked, sounding out of breath, almost frantic. Hear what? Trey asked, eyes wide. Tina looked back at the house, her expression shifting. I don't know. It sounded like someone walking around upstairs. And this, she held up a small, dust-covered brooch that sparkled under the beam of her flashlight. Where'd you get that? Luke asked, glancing at the brooch and then back at the dark silhouette of the house. It was in a closet upstairs, she said, her voice oddly hollow. And it looked like it was just waiting there, like someone left it behind. But the weird thing is the door, it just opened on its own. And when I grabbed it, I thought I heard someone breathing. At this, Elle shuddered. Maybe we should get out of here. Tina laughed, though it sounded strained. It's probably just the wind, or I don't know, maybe I imagined it. But it's strange, right? The rest of us exchanged wary looks, and though no one said it, we all knew that we felt it too. That strange heaviness, the oppressive air that seemed to weigh us down just standing near the house. And as we walked back home, the unease followed us, clinging to our thoughts, gnawing at our minds. Over the next few days, Tina kept the brooch, proudly showing it off as her trophy from the night. But something had shifted in her. She grew quiet, distracted. Sometimes, in the middle of a conversation, her gaze would drift as if she were listening to something far away, a sound only she could hear. Tina, are you okay? I asked one evening when we were alone, sitting on the porch under the waning summer sun. She shrugged, but her eyes were distant. It's nothing. Just sometimes I feel like I can still hear it. You know? That house. Like it's calling me back. You're not thinking about going back, are you? I asked, a chill running through me at the thought. No, she said quickly, but her voice was uncertain. At least not alone. After that first night, things changed in subtle but unmistakable ways. It was like Tina brought something back with her from that house. And as the days passed, she seemed different, distracted, as if listening to an invisible conversation no one else could hear. It was in the way her eyes would flick to empty corners, or how she'd pause mid-sentence, staring off into the distance with a look of intense concentration. For the rest of us, the thrill of the dare had faded quickly. I couldn't shake the feeling that something from that place had latched onto us, tagging along in silence. And no one wanted to be the first to say it, but I could see it in Elle's nervous glances, Trey's forced laughter, and Luke's unease every time Tina brought out that brooch she found in the house. One afternoon, we met up at the diner, trying to pretend everything was normal, like we weren't all haunted by shadows only we could see. But Tina was late. Again. She's not usually like this, right? Elle whispered, stirring her drink. Trey shook his head, his gaze fixed on the table. No. I mean, Tina's always been a little intense, but she's different now. It's like she's not really here anymore. Before any of us could respond, the bell over the diner's door jingled, and Tina walked in. She looked as if she hadn't slept in days, dark shadows under her eyes, her hair falling in loose, unkempt strands. But the strange thing was, she looked happier than ever. Hey everyone, she greeted, sliding into the booth beside us. Hi Tina, I said carefully, trying to read her expression. She grinned, pulling something out of her pocket. You're not going to believe what I found last night. She opened her hand, revealing another small trinket, this one a delicate, dust-covered ring with a tiny gemstone. It glittered under the diner lights, catching all our attention. Wait, you went back? Luke asked, eyes widening. Tina shrugged. I had to. It was like I couldn't stop thinking about it. There's so much more in that house, so much just waiting. And I don't know, I just felt drawn to it. Elle shot me a nervous glance. Tina, don't you think maybe you should leave it alone? But Tina just laughed, a hollow, unsettling sound that sent a shiver down my spine. Come on, guys. It's just an old house. What are you so scared of? Because it's not just an old house, I said, surprising even myself with how firm my voice sounded. There's something wrong with that place. Tina, ever since you went in there, you've been acting different. She stared at me, the grin slipping from her face. For a moment, a flicker of something else crossed her eyes, a mix of anger and confusion. But then it was gone, replaced by her usual, stubborn look. Maybe I'm just seeing things you can't, she muttered, slipping the ring back in her pocket. Maybe that place is only scary if you're too afraid to see it for what it really is. The rest of the day passed in a haze, Tina's words sticking with me long after we left the diner. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was slipping away from us, like she was falling under some kind of spell. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see that house, dark, looming, waiting. And I could see Tina inside, wandering those empty halls, searching for what? I wasn't even sure she knew anymore. Just as I was drifting off, my phone buzzed, startling me awake. I grabbed it, squinting at the screen. A text from Tina. Come over. I found something. Without even thinking, I threw on a Marcus, grabbed my flashlight, and headed out. My parents have long since fallen asleep, and the house was silent as I slipped out the front door. The streets were empty, and the night air was cold, a sharp reminder of the creeping chill that came with autumn. When I reached the old house, Tina was waiting outside, a strange look in her eyes. She smiled when she saw me, but it was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You actually came, she said, almost sounding surprised. You texted me. Of course I came. I paused, studying her face. Tina, what's going on with you? She glanced back at the house, her expression unreadable. It's hard to explain, but there's something in there, something that feels familiar, like it's been waiting for me all along. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I pushed it aside, taking a step toward her. Look, Tina, whatever you think you found in there, it's not worth it. This place isn't. It's not safe. She just laughed, shaking her head. You're always so cautious, Marcus. Always try to protect everyone. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a strange, almost pleading look. But I need to do this. I need to know. Before I could say anything, she turned and disappeared into the house, her figure swallowed by the shadows. I hesitated, every instinct telling me to leave, to go back home. But something, maybe loyalty, maybe sheer stubbornness, kept me rooted in place. And before I knew it, I was following her inside. The air was thick, musty, filled with the scent of rotting wood and something else, something older, like the faint trace of memories long forgotten. The floorboards creaked under my feet, and every shadow seemed to shift, like the house was alive, watching, waiting. I caught up with Tina in one of the upstairs rooms. She was standing in front of an old, broken mirror, her gaze fixed on her reflection. The ring she'd found earlier was on her finger, the gemstone glinting in the dim light. "Tina," I whispered, stepping closer. She turned to look at me, a strange smile on her face. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" She held up her hand, showing off the ring. "I think it belonged to someone important, someone who left something behind." I swallowed, feeling a growing sense of dread. "Tina, you don't know anything about that ring. For all we know, it could be cursed or something." She laughed, the sound echoing off the walls. "You really believe in curses, Marcus? I thought you were the rational one." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. I don't know what to believe anymore, but I know that this place, it's doing something to you. You're not yourself. She looked at me, her expression softening for a moment. Maybe I'm finally becoming who I was meant to be. I reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Tina, please, let's get out of here. You don't need this. You don't need any of it." For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of the old Tina, the friend I'd known for years. But then her gaze shifted, her eyes taking on that distant look again. "I can't leave," she whispered. "Not yet." Hours slipped by as I watched Tina wander through the house, as if in a trance. She moved from room to room, pausing in front of old portraits, running her fingers over dusty furniture, like she was piecing together a puzzle only she could see. At one point, she stopped in front of a locked door at the end of a long hallway. This is the last one," she murmured, reaching for the doorknob. The door creaked open, revealing a small, dimly lit room filled with strange objects. Old journals, broken clocks, and a stack of letters tied with a faded ribbon. Tina picked up one of the letters, her eyes scanning the words. It's a message," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "A message from someone who was trapped here. Someone who couldn't leave." I felt a chill run through me as I glanced over her shoulder, reading the faded words. "To whoever finds this, beware. This house is alive, feeding off those who enter, pulling them into its grasp." I thought I could resist, but I was wrong. It's a trap, a place that keeps you, even after you leave. Once you enter, you're never really free. I pulled back, the realization sinking in. "Tina, this isn't some adventure. This place, it's dangerous. We have to go. Now." She looked at me, her eyes wide, as if she was seeing me clearly for the first time. "Marcus, I don't know how to leave." The house seemed to shift around us, walls creaking, shadows lengthening, as if it were closing in, feeding off our fear. And I knew then that it wasn't just a dare or an old legend. This place was alive, and it wanted us to stay. "Come on," I said, grabbing her hand. "We're getting out of here." Together, we raced down the stairs, the walls echoing with our footsteps. But as we reached the front door, I felt it, the weight, the pull, like invisible hands trying to drag us back. With a final burst of strength, we pushed through the door, stumbling into the cool night air. We didn't stop running until we reached the edge of the woods, where we finally collapsed, breathing heavily, the house looming behind us, silent and still. But as I looked at Tina, I knew that we hadn't truly escaped. The next morning was quieter than usual. We hadn't spoken about what had happened, and none of us were eager to start. But the memory of the house lingered over each of us, like a fog that wouldn't lift. I glanced over at Tina, who was sitting in the corner of the coffee shop, staring into her mud. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept a minute since we'd left the house. Her eyes had that same haunted look, that faraway gaze that hinted at something she wasn't sharing. Across the table, Elle gave me a worried glance. She's been like this all morning, she whispered. I nodded, lowering my voice. It's like she's still there somehow. I don't know how to help her. Trey leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. Maybe it's not her that's still there. Maybe it's here. It started subtly, barely noticeable at first. A misplaced book here, a creak in the floorboards there. But soon, it became harder to ignore. I'd be lying in bed, trying to convince myself that everything was fine, when I'd hear the unmistakable sound of footsteps down the hall, just outside my bedroom door. The first time, I thought it was just my imagination, a leftover fear from the night at the house. But when I opened the door, there was nothing there. Just an empty hallway and the soft, echoing silence of the night. It wasn't just me either. Elle mentioned hearing whispers in her room, like someone was standing just outside her window, murmuring her name. Luke swore he saw a shadow moving through his backyard, tall and silent, just watching. And Tina was the worst off. She'd stopped coming to school, stopped answering our texts. It was like she was trapped, locked in some invisible prison none of us could see. One night, I finally gathered the courage to visit her house. Her mom let me in, her face a mixture of worry and relief. She hasn't come out of her room in days, she whispered, leading me up the stairs. When I opened the door, Tina was sitting on the floor, surrounded by papers, her eyes bloodshot and unfocused. She barely looked up as I entered, her gaze fixed on something only she could see. Tina, I said softly, kneeling beside her. It's me, Marcus. She blinked, her eyes slowly focusing on me. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of recognition, but then it was gone, replaced by that same haunted look. It's calling me, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I can hear it every night. It won't stop until I go back. I swallowed, a chill running down my spine. Tina, you don't have to go back. That place, it's not safe. She shook her head, her eyes filling with a strange, desperate intensity. You don't understand. It's not a choice. It's like I'm part of it now, like it's inside me. Days turned into weeks, and Tina only grew worse. She stopped coming to school entirely, and her mom called us, begging for help. Elle, Trey, Luke, and I tried everything we could think of, visits, phone calls, messages, but nothing worked. Tina was slipping away from us, and there was nothing we could do to stop it. One night, after another restless evening filled with strange noises and fleeting shadows, I made a decision. I couldn't just sit by and watch Tina fade away. If the house had somehow marked us, somehow latched onto us, then the only way to free ourselves was to go back and face it. When I told Elle and the others, they looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Are you serious? Elle hissed, her eyes wide. You want to go back there? After everything that's happened? I nodded, meeting her gaze. Look, I know it sounds crazy, but Tina needs us. She's not going to make it if we don't do something. We can't just abandon her. Trey sighed, rubbing his temples. Marcus, I don't know if I can go through that again. That place, it was wrong. Like it wanted us there, like it was feeding off us. I clenched my fists, a surge of determination flooding through me. Maybe that's true. But if there's even a chance we can help Tina, then I have to try. And I can't do it alone. After a long, tense silence, Elle nodded. Fine, but we stick together this time. No splitting up, no running off. We go in, we find Tina, and we get out. Agreed. The others nodded reluctantly, their faces a mixture of fear and resolve. And just like that, we found ourselves standing once again at the edge of the woods, staring up at that dark, looming silhouette that had haunted our every thought since the night we first dared to enter. The house was silent as we approached, its windows dark and empty, like eyes watching us with silent amusement. The air was thick, heavy, filled with the scent of damp earth and something else, something older and fouler. As we stepped inside, the door creaked shut behind us, sealing us in with a final, echoing click. For a moment, none of us moved, our breaths caught in our throats. It felt like the house was waiting, holding its breath along with us. Tina, I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. No answer, just the soft, eerie silence pressing in from all sides. We moved through the house slowly, our footsteps echoing off the walls. The air grew colder with each step, and the shadows seemed to lengthen, reaching out toward us like grasping fingers. Do you think she's still here? Luke whispered, his voice trembling. She has to be, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. She didn't just disappear. The house, it has her. I know it. We made our way to the upper floor, where we'd found her before. But as we reached the top of the stairs, something strange happened. The air grew thick, almost suffocating, and the walls seemed to close in, narrowing around us. Is it smaller? Elle asked, looking around in confusion. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. It's like it's changing, like it's trying to keep us here. Before we could react, a faint, familiar voice echoed down the hall. Marcus! I spun around, my eyes widening. Tina? There she was, standing at the end of the hallway, her figure barely visible in the dim light. She looked pale, almost translucent, her eyes distant and unfocused. Tina! I called, starting toward her. But as I moved, she took a step back, her expression twisted with fear. Don't, she whispered, her voice barely audible. It's too late. You shouldn't have come. I stopped, a sinking feeling settling in my stomach. What do you mean? We're here to help you. We're getting you out of here. She shook her head, her eyes filling with a strange, desperate look. You can't. It won't let us leave. Not anymore. The floor creaked, and I glanced down, realizing with horror that the wood beneath my feet was rotting, crumbling away into darkness. I stumbled back, grabbing Elle's arm as the floor gave way, revealing a yawning void beneath us. Run! Tina screamed, her voice echoing through the house. We turned, racing down the stairs as the walls began to close in, the shadows twisting and writhing like living things. The house was alive, a creature of darkness and hunger, and it wasn't letting us go. We stumbled out of the front door, gasping for air as we collapsed onto the front lawn. Behind us, the house loomed, silent and still, as if it had never moved at all. But Tina was gone. We had lost her, and there was nothing we could do to bring her back. For days after, we searched, combing the woods, questioning neighbors, even going back to the house one last time. But she was gone, lost to the darkness, a ghost haunting the empty halls of Delwick. And though we tried to move on, to forget, the memory of that night lingered. The footsteps in the hallway, the whispers in the dark, the feeling of being watched. Delwick had marked us, bound us to its darkness, and no matter how far we ran, we could never escape its grasp. Years passed, and though we grew older, the memories remained, vivid and haunting. The house was gone now, torn down to make way for new developments. But in my dreams, I still see it, standing tall and dark, waiting for the next group of fools to step inside. And sometimes, on quiet nights, I hear her voice, whispering from the shadows, calling me back to the place where it all began. The place I swore I'd never return to, and yet, deep down I know that one day I will.